I'm Cheryl, 38 female. I live in the same quiet, suburban house I grew up in, now serving as the full-time caregiver for my elderly father. My freelance graphic design career has been relegated to late nights and the rare quiet afternoon, a small sacrifice, I told myself, for family. For 5 years, my older sister Brenda handled Dad's finances while I handled everything else. A deal that I thought was fair until a single piece of paper revealed her lavish life was being funded by our father's slow decline. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The agreement was made 5 years ago in the sterile, beige waiting room of a cardiology unit. My sister Brenda and I sat on opposite ends of a worn vinyl couch, the air thick with the scent of antiseptic and unspoken anxiety. Dad, at 73, had just survived what the doctors called a significant cardiac event. He was tough, a retired history professor who approached life with academic curiosity, but this had shaken him. It had shaken us all. While he recovered, it became clear he could no longer live alone. I was the one who volunteered to move back in. My life was more flexible. As a freelance graphic designer, I could work from anywhere, or so I thought. My client base was modest but steady, and I convinced myself I could manage it alongside caring for Dad. Brenda, on the other hand, was a rising star. At 39, she was building a brand as a lifestyle influencer. A career that seemed to consist of beautiful photos in exotic locations, sponsored posts for expensive skincare, and a constant performance of effortless success. She had a husband, 2 kids in private school, and a mortgage on a house that looked like it belonged in a magazine. "It just makes more sense, Cheryl," she'd said, her voice a practiced blend of sympathy and practicality. She reached over and patted my knee, her rings cold against my skin. "You're here, on the ground. You can handle his day-to-day care, the appointments, the meals. I'll take care of all the bills. His pension, his investments, it can be overwhelming. I'll manage it all, make sure everything is paid, and send you money for groceries and whatever else you need." It sounded logical. Brenda had always been better with numbers, more organized, more ruthless. I was the creative one, the one who lived in a world of color palettes and fonts, not spreadsheets and portfolios. The thought of managing Dad's retirement funds, navigating the labyrinth of medical billing, and dealing with insurance companies was genuinely terrifying. I was already exhausted by the prospect of becoming a full-time caregiver. Handing the financial burden to Brenda felt like a relief, so I agreed. We shook on it, a solemn pact made under the hum of fluorescent lights. Dad, when we told him the plan, just nodded wearily. "Whatever you girls think is best," he'd murmured, his voice weak. "Just take care of each other." The first year was a blur of adjustment. I learned the rhythm of Dad's medications, the subtle signs of his good days and bad days, and how to cook the low-sodium meals his doctor demanded. My work suffered. Projects I used to turn around in a week now took a month. Clients grew impatient, and my income dwindled until it was barely a trickle. Every month, Brenda would transfer money into my account for household expenses. It was always the exact same amount, never a penny more, and if an unexpected expense came up, a plumbing issue, a new pair of orthopedic shoes for Dad, I had to call her, explain the situation in detail, and wait for her approval before she sent the extra funds. It was humiliating. "Are you sure you need the name brand for that?" she'd ask, her tone implying I was being frivolous. "The generic works just as well." I felt less like a partner in Dad's care and more like an employee submitting an expense report. Meanwhile, Brenda's life seemed to get more glamorous by the day. Her social media was a highlight reel of triumphs. One week she was on a wellness retreat in Bali, sponsored, of course. The next she was showcasing a kitchen renovation that cost more than my annual income. When I'd see the pictures, a knot of resentment would tighten in my stomach. Here I was, reusing tea bags and patching Dad's old sweaters, while she was sipping champagne in a rooftop infinity pool. I tried to push the feeling down. She was working hard, I told myself. She had a family to support. Our situations were just different. Dad was mostly oblivious to the disparity. His world had shrunk to the four walls of our house, the garden in the backyard, and the classic films we'd watch in the evenings. His mind, once so sharp, was beginning to soften at the edges. He'd forget names, lose track of conversations, and sometimes stare out the window for an hour, lost eye. And a past I couldn't access. My love for him was the anchor in my life, but the weight of it was immense. I was lonely. I was tired. I was 38, but I felt 60. The only other constant in Dad's life was Mr. Gable. He had been Dad's accountant for over 40 years, a quiet, meticulous man who had guided my father through every financial milestone from his first mortgage to his retirement plan. Mr. Gable was semi-retired now, but he still handled the taxes for a few of his oldest clients, Dad included. Once a year, Brenda would gather all the paperwork and meet with him. "Everything's in perfect order," she'd announce cheerfully after these meetings. "Mr. Gable says Dad's finances are as solid as a rock, nothing for you to worry about." I never had any reason to doubt her. Why would I? She was my sister. We were a team, bound by a promise we made in a hospital waiting room. I was the hands and she was the head. It wasn't fair, perhaps, but I believed it was necessary. I was so focused on keeping my father alive and comfortable that I never stopped to question the arrangement that was slowly draining the life out of me. I was holding up my end of the bargain. I trusted, with every fiber of my exhausted being, that she was holding up hers. The first crack in my trust didn't come from a dramatic revelation, but from a quiet, offhand comment. It was a chilly Tuesday in October, about 4 years into our arrangement. I was on the phone with our cousin, Sarah, catching up while I peeled potatoes for dinner. Sarah was talking about her recent trip to Italy, a whirlwind tour of Tuscany she'd taken with her husband. "Oh, you'll never guess who we ran into in Florence," she said, her voice bright. "Brenda and her whole family. They were staying at this absolutely gorgeous hotel, the St. Regis. We only saw them for a second in the lobby. I yelled her name, but I don't think she heard me. They were getting into a private car." I paused, the peeler still in my hand. "Brenda was in Italy?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "She didn't mention she was going away." "Oh, yeah, it must have been a last-minute thing. She posted about it later, something about a spontaneous family adventure. The pictures were stunning. You should look." After I hung up, I did look. There it was on her profile. Brenda, her husband, and their 2 smiling kids posed in front of the Ponte Vecchio. The caption was full of hashtags: family travel, making memories, blessed. The post was a week old. I scrolled back through my texts. A week ago, I had texted Brenda in a panic. Dad's prescription copay had unexpectedly tripled, and the money she'd sent for the month was already gone. I needed an extra $200 to cover it. Her reply had come hours later. "Things are really tight right now, Cheryl. I had a few clients fall through. Can you cover it and I'll pay you back next month?" I had covered it. I'd used the last of my own meager savings, the money I'd been trying to put aside for a desperately needed new laptop. Seeing her in Florence, staying at a hotel where rooms started at over $1,000 a night, felt like a slap in the face. Things are really tight. The lie was so blatant, so shameless. For the first time, a cold, sharp suspicion pierced through my exhaustion. It wasn't just resentment anymore, it was doubt. The whispers started to get louder after that. I began paying closer attention, noticing things I had previously dismissed. Brenda would call and complain about money, the cost of the kids' tennis lessons, the price of organic groceries, all while wearing a new designer handbag in her latest profile picture. She'd talk about the importance of living authentically while her life seemed like a curated fiction. One afternoon, a letter arrived addressed to my father. It was from a luxury cruise line, thanking him for his continued loyalty and offering him an exclusive discount on a Mediterranean package. I frowned, confused. Dad hadn't been on a cruise in over a decade. He hadn't left the state in 5 years. I assumed it was junk mail and was about to toss it when I noticed the customer ID number on the letterhead. Curious, I went to the cruise line's website and typed it in, along with Dad's name and date of birth. The account profile loaded, and my breath caught in my chest. The account was in Dad's name, but the booking history told a different story. There were 3 cruises listed in the past 4 years: a 7-day trip to the Caribbean, a 10-day tour of the Greek Isles, an Alaskan adventure. The primary traveler on each booking was Brenda and her husband. The payment method listed for all of them was a credit card ending in the same 4 digits as our father's. My hands started to shake. This wasn't just a fancy hotel. This was thousands, maybe tens of thousands of dollars. I thought back to the timelines. The Caribbean cruise coincided with a time Brenda told me Dad's investment portfolio had taken a small hit, and we needed to tighten our belts for a few months. The trip to Greece happened the same summer she denied my request for funds to hire a part-time home health aide for just a few hours a week, to give me a desperately needed break. "We just can't afford it, Cheryl," she had said, her voice dripping with fake regret. The lies were piling up, forming a sickening pattern. Every time she had claimed poverty was a time she had been living in luxury, and she was using our father's money to do it. The man I was nursing day and night, the man whose dignity I fought to preserve with every small act of care, was being systematically drained by his other daughter. The unfairness of it all was a physical blow. I felt dizzy, nauseous. I started looking for more. I knew Brenda kept all of Dad's financial documents at her house, claiming it was safer there. I had no access to his bank accounts, his investment statements, or his credit card bills. She had locked me out completely, isolating me with the physical work while she maintained total control over the resources. She had made me feel like a supplicant, begging for scraps from my own father's table. That evening, as I was helping Dad get ready for bed, he looked at me, his blue eyes cloudy with confusion. "Did Brenda call today?" he asked. She was supposed to tell me about the thing. "What thing, Dad?" I asked gently, pulling his blanket up to his chin. "The money," he said, his brow furrowed in concentration. "For the house. She said we were selling the house." My blood ran cold. "What are you talking about? We're not selling the house." He shook his head, frustrated. "Yes, we are. She brought some papers to sign, last week. Said it was for the best, to pay for my doctors." He drifted off, his eyes closing, the thread of the conversation lost. I stood frozen in the dim light of his bedroom, the hum of the oxygen machine filling the silence. Papers. She had him sign papers. The whispers of doubt had become a deafening roar. My sister wasn't just skimming off the top. She was planning to sell the roof over our heads. The conversation with Dad about selling the house lit a fire under me. The vague, unsettling suspicion had solidified into a terrifying certainty. I had to get proof. I couldn't confront Brenda with just a handful of vacation photos and a confusing comment from an elderly man. I needed documents, numbers, something undeniable. The problem was, Brenda guarded Dad's financial information like a dragon hoarding gold. Every piece of mail related to his finances, bank statements, investment reports, bills, was forwarded directly to her address. It was part of the original arrangement to make things easier for me. I now saw it for what it was, a firewall. My chance came, as it so often does, through a moment of chaos. Brenda called me one Friday morning in a state of high drama. Her youngest son had fallen at school and broken his arm. She was at the emergency room, her husband was out of town on business, and she was, in her own words, completely losing her mind. In the middle of her frantic monologue, she said the words I was waiting for. "Cheryl, I need a huge favor. Mr. Gable just called. He's finished Dad's tax return, and it needs to be signed and mailed by Monday. The folder is on the desk in my home office. Could you possibly go over there and get it? I've already signed my part as power of attorney, but Dad needs to sign the main form. The spare key is under the ceramic frog by the back door." My heart hammered against my ribs. This was it. "Of course, Brenda. Don't you worry about a thing, just focus on Leo. I'll handle it." I tried to sound calm, sisterly, and reliable. Inside, I was a bundle of nerves and adrenaline. An hour later, I was letting myself into Brenda's immaculate house. It was silent and cold, a stark contrast to the lived-in, slightly worn-out comfort of my own home. Everything was shades of white and gray, with strategic pops of color from expensive art books arranged just so on the coffee table. It felt less like a home and more like a showroom. Her home office was just as sterile. A sleek white desk stood before a large window overlooking her perfectly manicured lawn. And there it was, sitting squarely in the middle of the desk. A thick manila folder with Dad Taxes 2025 written on the tab in Brenda's neat, controlled handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. The official tax return was on top, clipped together with a yellow sticky note indicating where Dad needed to sign, but beneath it was everything else. Everything Mr. Gable would have needed to prepare the return: bank statements, a summary of investment income, credit card year-end summaries. It was all there. I knew I didn't have much time. I pulled out my phone and with shaking hands began taking pictures of every single page. My breath hitched as I saw the first bank statement: Dad's pension and Social Security DEP. Assets came in on the 1st and 3rd of every month, a substantial, steady income. But the withdrawals, they were staggering. There were weekly cash withdrawals of hundreds of dollars from ATMs near Brenda's house. There were transfers to her personal credit card, labeled innocuously as reimbursement. There were payments to a high-end car leasing company, a private tennis club, and a recurring monthly charge for a design consultation firm I knew was code for her interior decorator. Then I saw the credit card statements. Dad's card, the one Brenda supposedly used only for his medical expenses, was a horror show. There were charges from luxury department stores, five-star restaurants, and online boutiques selling clothes I knew I'd seen on her social media. The trip to Italy was there, clear as day, round-trip business-class airfare, the hotel in Florence, even a charge for a leather workshop in Tuscany. She had paid for her entire European vacation with our father's money. I felt a wave of dizziness and leaned against the desk to steady myself. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. This wasn't just a few extravagances. This was a systematic, long-term plundering. She was treating our father's life savings like her own personal slush fund. As I flipped through the pages, my shock curdled into a cold, hard rage. I saw a charge for a spa day on the same day I had called her, crying with exhaustion because Dad had been up all night in pain and I hadn't slept in 48 hours. I saw a payment for a $1,000 handbag 2 days after she'd told me we couldn't afford a new wheelchair cushion for him. Each photograph I took felt like gathering evidence for a trial. This was the proof. This was the weapon I needed. Tucked at the very back of the folder, I found something else that made my stomach drop. It was a property appraisal for our family home, dated just 3 weeks prior. Beside it was a preliminary sales agreement with a local real estate agency, the same one Brenda worked for. She was not only planning to sell the house, she was planning to collect a commission on it. I carefully put every paper back in the folder, making sure it looked exactly as I had found it. I took the tax return that needed signing and left the house, the spare key back under the ceramic frog. I drove home in a daze, the images from the documents burned into my mind. The betrayal was so complete, so profound, it felt like it had hollowed me out. She hadn't just stolen money. She had stolen my time, my career, my peace of mind. She had let me sacrifice my life to care for our father, while she used his resources to build a fantasy for herself. She had made me a pauper in my own home. That evening, when I sat with Dad to get him to sign the tax form, my hand was steady. He looped his signature, frail and shaky, on the line I pointed to. He had no idea what he was signing, just as he had no idea the woman he trusted with his legacy was actively robbing him blind. As I folded the paper and slipped it into its envelope, I made a silent promise to him, and to myself. This wasn't just going to stop. Brenda was going to answer for every single dollar. Armed with the damning photos on my phone, I felt a surge of righteous fury. My first instinct was to drive straight back to Brenda's house, throw the evidence in her face, and watch her perfect, curated world crumble. But as I sat in my quiet kitchen late that night, the adrenaline began to fade, replaced by a cold, clear-headed strategy. A screaming match would accomplish nothing. Brenda was a master manipulator. She would twist the narrative, accuse me of being jealous, and maybe even try to get Dad to side with her. No, a direct confrontation was a battle I would lose. To win this, I needed more than just a folder full of statements. I needed an unimpeachable ally. I needed Mr. Gable. The next morning, I looked up the number for his accounting firm. A polite receptionist informed me that Mr. Gable was only in the office on Wednesdays, but she could take a message. I hesitated. I couldn't leave a message saying, "I think my sister is embezzling from my father." I needed to speak to him directly. "It's a personal matter regarding Arthur," I said, using my father's first name. "Could you please tell him his daughter Cheryl called? It's urgent." He called me back that afternoon. His voice was exactly as I remembered it, calm, steady, and precise. "Cheryl, hello, your father is all right, I hope." "He's fine, Mr. Gable, thank you for asking," I began, my heart pounding. "The reason I'm calling is, I have some serious concerns about the handling of his finances." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "I see," he said, his tone becoming more cautious. "As you know, your sister Brenda holds the power of attorney. I typically deal directly with her on all financial matters as instructed." "I understand," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking, "but I have found evidence, strong evidence, that Brenda has been misusing his funds for her own personal expenses. We're talking about a very large amount of money over several years." Another pause, longer this time. I could almost hear the gears turning in his methodical mind. Mr. Gable was old school. He valued loyalty and integrity above all else. He had known my father for decades, long before Brenda had built her fantasy life or I had moved back home. His loyalty was to his client, Arthur. "That is a very serious accusation, Cheryl," he finally said. "Do you have any documentation to support this?" "I do," I said. "I have copies of bank and credit card statements from the tax file you just prepared. They show years of personal purchases, vacations, car payments, all from my father's accounts." The silence on the line was heavy. When he spoke again, his voice had lost its professional distance and was filled with a grim concern. "Your father is a good man. I've handled his accounts since he was a young professor. He trusted me to help him build a secure retirement. He trusted his family to protect it." He took a deep breath. "Meet me at my office tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Bring everything you have." The next day, I sat across a large oak desk from Mr. Gable. His office was filled with framed degrees and photos of his grandchildren, a testament to a long and steady life. He was a small man with kind eyes, but as he looked at the images on my phone, which I had printed out and arranged in chronological order, his expression hardened. He put on a pair of reading glasses and examined each page with painstaking care, occasionally letting out a low, frustrated sigh. He used a calculator, his fingers flying across the keys, scribbling notes on a yellow legal pad. For nearly an hour, the only sounds in the room were the rustle of paper and the soft click of the calculator keys. I watched him, my anxiety a tight knot in my stomach. I had placed all my hope in this man, a virtual stranger, trusting that his loyalty to my father would outweigh any reluctance to get involved in a messy family dispute. Finally, he pushed his glasses up on his forehead and looked at me, his eyes full of a quiet fury. "It's worse than you think," he said, his voice low. He turned the legal pad towards me. On it were 2 columns of numbers. One was labeled legitimate expenses, property taxes, utilities, an estimate for groceries and medical copays. The other was labeled questionable withdrawals. The second column was astronomically larger. "Based on these statements alone," Mr. Gable said, tapping the pad with his pen, "I estimate your sister has misappropriated at least $200,000 over the past 4 years. And this is likely just the tip of the iceberg. This doesn't account for investment accounts I haven't seen recent statements for." I gasped, the number sucking the air from my lungs. I knew it was bad, but I hadn't imagined a figure that high. "The cruise to Alaska," he murmured, shaking his head in disgust. "I remember asking her about that transaction. She told me it was a payment for a specialized memory care consultant for your father. She fabricated an invoice for it." He looked at me, his expression one of deep disappointment. "She has been lying to me for years, using my services to legitimize her theft." His validation was a profound relief, but it was quickly followed by a new wave of panic. "What do we do?" I whispered. Mr. Gable leaned back in his chair, his gaze fixed on the wall behind me. He was thinking, strategizing. A direct confrontation is unwise. She controls the accounts. The moment she feels threatened, she could empty them, and recovering the funds would become exponentially more difficult. And we need to protect your father from the stress of a public legal battle if we can avoid it. He leaned forward again, his eyes locking onto mine. "We need a complete financial picture. I have the authority to request duplicate statements directly from the banks and investment firms on behalf of my client Arthur. But to do that without raising Brenda's suspicion, I'll need a plausible reason." A slow, calculated smile touched his lips for the first time. "I think it's time for a comprehensive estate plan review. It's the perfect cover. I will tell Brenda that, given your father's age, we need to conduct a full audit of all his assets to prepare for the future. She won't dare refuse a request like that. It would look too suspicious." We had a plan. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a strategist. "What will you be looking for?" I asked. "Everything," he said, his voice firm. "Every transfer, every withdrawal, every check written from his accounts for the last 5 years. I will build a complete, undeniable record of her fraud. She used my tax preparation to hide her crimes. Now, I'll use my accounting skills to expose them." He reached across He desk and patted my hand. "You've been carrying this burden alone for too long, Cheryl. Now, you have an ally." Mr. Gable was as good as his word. He called Brenda the very next day. I wasn't privy to the conversation, but he recounted it to me later with a grim satisfaction. He had framed the comprehensive asset review as a routine, albeit thorough, part of long-term estate planning. He'd used phrases like due diligence and protecting Arthur's legacy for his children and grandchildren. As he predicted, Brenda couldn't object without raising a massive red flag. She had played the part of the responsible, organized daughter for so long that she was trapped in her own narrative. She agreed immediately, even offering to help gather any necessary documents, her voice, according to Mr. Gable, a perfect mask of cooperative concern. The information began to trickle into Mr. Gable's office, and our weekly meetings became the focal point of my life. He worked with the quiet, relentless focus of a master craftsman. With the authority from my father, which he secured during a brief, clear-headed moment for Dad, explaining it simply as getting our paperwork in order. He bypassed Brenda and had years of statements sent directly to him. The financial archives of my father's life were laid bare on that oak desk. Each new statement revealed a deeper layer of Brenda's deception. We discovered she had opened a new credit card in Dad's name 2 years ago, one I had never known existed. The statements for this card, which had been sent to a P.O. box she controlled, were a ledger of her vanity. Monthly payments to a high-end salon for hair extensions and treatments, charges for cosmetic procedures, a recurring subscription to a service that delivered designer clothes for her to rent for her social media posts. She wasn't just funding her vacations. She was funding the very construction of her fake identity, all on the back of our father's hard-earned money. The most sickening discovery came from the investment portfolio statements. Dad had a healthy portfolio of stocks and mutual funds meant to be his nest egg. Brenda had been systematically selling off shares, small amounts at a time, to avoid triggering any major alarms. The proceeds were then transferred to Dad's checking account, where they would mingle with his pension income before she siphoned them off. In her narrative to me, the portfolio had been underperforming due to market volatility. In reality, the market had been strong. The only thing underperforming was Brenda's conscience. Mr. Gable compiled everything into a master spreadsheet. He created charts and graphs, tracing the flow of money with forensic precision. Every suspicious transaction was highlighted, cross-referenced with Brenda's social media posts, and annotated with notes. A $5,000 withdrawal in March corresponded to the week she posted about her surprise anniversary getaway to a luxury resort in Napa. A series of large payments to a contractor matched the timeline of her kitchen renovation. "She's clever, I'll give her that," Mr. Gable said one afternoon, peering at a column of figures. She's been coding many of the transfers as medical reimbursement or household maintenance. On a surface level, it might pass a cursory glance, but the frequency and the amounts, they don't add up. There is no reality in which your father's care costs this much. As Mr. Gable built the financial case, I had my own role to play. I needed to secure my position and protect my father's immediate well-being. My biggest fear was still the house. The appraisal and the preliminary sales agreement I had photographed were a ticking bomb. I needed to find a way to stop it. I started by making a few quiet phone calls of my own. I called the real estate agency Brenda worked for, pretending to be a prospective buyer interested in properties in our neighborhood. I casually mentioned our address, saying I'd heard a rumor it might be coming on the market. The agent I spoke to confirmed it. Yes, my colleague Brenda is handling that one. It's a pocket listing for now, but it should be going public in the next month or so. Next, I needed to understand Dad's legal situation. I used the last of my emergency funds to pay for a 1-hour consultation with an elder law attorney. I laid out the situation hypothetically, without using names. The lawyer was clear. If the existing power of attorney document was valid, Brenda had broad authority. However, she also had a fiduciary duty to act in my father's best interest. Misappropriating funds was a clear violation of that duty. The lawyer advised that the first step to protecting him would be to have that power of attorney revoked and a new one established. But to do that, we would need to prove that Dad was mentally competent to make that change. This was the hardest part. Dad's lucidity came and went like a flickering candle. Some days he was sharp, recalling debt. Ails from his teaching days with perfect clarity. On other days, he was lost in a fog. I began keeping a journal, documenting his moments of clarity. I recorded our conversations, noting the date, time, and topic. I engaged him in discussions about current events, history, and family matters, gently probing his understanding. I needed to build a record that showed he still possessed the capacity to make his own decisions, even if those moments were becoming less frequent. My alliance with Mr. Gable was my lifeline. We were two very different people, the meticulous accountant and the weary caregiver, united by a common cause. His quiet, methodical work gave me the strength to continue my own. He was building the case file, brick by brick, while I was shoring up the defenses at home, preparing for the inevitable confrontation. One Wednesday, I arrived at his office to find him looking at a single piece of paper, an expression of profound disgust on his face. "I think I've found the final piece of the puzzle," he said grimly. He slid the paper across the desk. It was a loan application. Brenda had applied for a home equity line of credit against our father's house. The house was paid off, a clean asset. She was attempting to borrow against it to the tune of $150,000. The application had been submitted just 2 days ago. "She's getting greedy," Mr. Gable said, "and reckless. This is our endgame. We have to act now before this loan gets approved." The loan application was the catalyst. It was no longer a matter of simply recovering stolen funds. It was a race to prevent Brenda from encumbering our family home with a massive debt. Mr. Gable and I agreed that the time for quiet investigation was over. It was time for the confrontation. But it couldn't be a simple family argument. It had to be a carefully orchestrated event, one where Brenda would have no room to lie, deflect, or manipulate. It had to be an ambush. Mr. Gable devised the plan. We would call a family financial meeting. The pretense was to discuss the results of his comprehensive asset review and to present a long-term financial plan for Dad's care. It was the perfect trap, baited with the very subject Brenda thought she controlled. Mr. Gable would present, I would be there as the caregiver, and we insisted Brenda attend with her husband, Mark. Mark was a passive, image-conscious man who, we suspected, was either ignorant of the full extent of Brenda's fraud or willfully blind to it. His presence would add another layer of pressure. The meeting was set for the following Saturday at Mr. Gable's office. The neutral territory was crucial. This wouldn't be happening in Brenda's sterile showroom of a house or in the home she was trying to sell out from under us. It would happen in the domain of the man whose job was to expose the truth in numbers. The days leading up to the meeting were the most stressful of my life. I had to maintain a facade of normalcy with Brenda, speaking to her on the phone about groceries and Dad's upcoming doctor's appointment as if nothing was wrong. Every pleasantry felt like a lie, every polite word a betrayal of the rage simmering just beneath my surface. On Saturday morning, I walked into Mr. Gable's office and found him ready. He had set up the conference room with a large screen at one end. On the table in front of him was a thick, spiral-bound report. It was his masterpiece of forensic accounting. He had titled it simply, Asset Review, Arthur Miller. Brenda and Mark arrived right on time, all smiles and businesslike professionalism. Brenda was wearing a cream-colored silk blouse and expensive jewelry, the picture of a successful woman taking time out of her busy weekend to manage her father's affairs. Mark followed in her wake, looking slightly uncomfortable in a sport coat. "Mr. Gable, so good to see you," Brenda said, her voice bright and confident. "Cheryl, I'm so glad we're finally doing this. It's so important to be on the same page." We all took our seats around the polished table. The air was thick with tension that only I and Mr. Gable seemed to feel. He began the meeting calmly, thanking them for coming. He spoke about Dad's long-term prognosis and the rising costs of in-home care. He was laying the groundwork, establishing the premise. Brenda nodded along, a look of solemn concern on her face. Then Mr. Gable turned on the projector. The first slide was a simple summary of Dad's income from his pension and Social Security. "As you can see," he said, "Arthur has a stable, comfortable income. However, over the past 5 years, his net worth has decreased at a truly alarming rate." He clicked to the next slide. It was a line graph showing the depletion of Dad's investment accounts. The line trended sharply downwards. Brenda shifted in her seat. "Well, yes," she interjected smoothly. "The market has been very unpredictable, and Dad's medical costs are quite high." "Let's talk about those costs, Mr. Gable said, his voice hardening ever so slightly. He clicked again. The screen was now filled with a detailed breakdown of expenses taken from the master spreadsheet. It was divided into categories: housing, medical, groceries. And then a fourth category, other. The other category had a staggering number next to it, $327,450. Mark let out a low whistle. Brenda's smile tightened. "That seems high," she said, forcing a little laugh. "There must be a mistake." "There is no mistake," Mr. Gable said, his voice now like ice. "Let's break down that other category, shall we?" And then he began. One by one, he put up slides detailing her theft. The screen showed the credit card statement with the charges from her Italian vacation, right next to a screenshot of her Instagram post from Florence. It showed the payments to the luxury car company. It showed the withdrawals for her spa days, her designer clothes, her salon appointments. He showed the cruise bookings, the payments to her interior decorator, and the checks written out to her private tennis club. With every click, another piece of her carefully constructed life was revealed as a fraud. Brenda's face went from pale to ghostly white. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Mark stared at the screen, his jaw slack, a look of utter disbelief on his face. He kept glancing from the screen to his wife, as if he couldn't reconcile the two images. "You told me that was a bonus from work," he whispered, pointing a trembling finger at the charge for a pair of diamond earrings. Brenda ignored him, her eyes fixed on Mr. Gable. "This is an invasion of my privacy. These are my personal expenses. There must have been a mix-up with the cards." "There was no mix-up, Brenda," I said, speaking for the first time. My voice was low and steady, fueled by years of suppressed anger. "I called the cruise line. The booking was for you and Mark. I saw the receipts for your kitchen renovation. They were paid from Dad's investment account." The final blow was the loan application. Mr. Gable displayed a copy of the document on the screen. "And this," he said, "is a home equity application you filed 4 days ago against your father's property. an attempt to borrow $150,000 against a home that is not yours. This is not mismanagement, Brenda. This is felony fraud. The room fell into a dead silence. Brenda was cornered, exposed, with nowhere left to run. The mask of the perfect daughter had been shattered, and what was left was ugly and desperate. Mr. Gable slid 3 copies of his report across the table. "This is the final invoice," he said. "It is a full accounting of the $327,450 that you have stolen from your father. You have 2 options. Option 1 is we turn this entire file over to the district attorney and the police. You will be prosecuted, and you will almost certainly go to jail. Your husband, as a beneficiary of these funds, may also be implicated." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Mark looked like he was going to be sick. "Option 2, Mr. Gable continued, is you make restitution. You will sign over the title of your home to a trust established for your father's care, its equity being roughly equivalent to the amount you have stolen. You will sign a document immediately revoking your power of attorney. You will have no further access to or control over any of Arthur's assets, ever again. And you will have no contact with your father unless Cheryl allows it." Brenda stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and hatred. She looked at me, and for a moment I saw the sister I grew up with, the one who used to bully me on the playground. But now she had no power. "You have 1 hour to decide," Mr. Gable said, standing up. "I have the necessary documents prepared. I suggest you use the time to speak with your husband." He and I walked out of the conference room, closing the door behind us, leaving them alone with the wreckage of their lies. Leaving Brenda and Mark in that conference room felt like walking out of a storm into a calm, quiet morning. Mr. Gable and I sat in his personal office, the door to the conference room firmly shut. We didn't speak for several minutes. There was nothing left to say. The evidence had spoken for us. The numbers had told the story. Now, we could only wait for the verdict to be delivered not by a judge or a jury, but by a cornered thief. The hour passed in what felt like both an eternity and a blink of an eye. We could hear the low murmur of voices from the other room, occasionally rising in anger before sinking back into a tense whisper. I imagined the conversation they were having. The accusations, the denials, the desperate search for an escape route where none existed. Mark, whose entire sense of self seemed tied to their image of affluence, was now face to face with the rotten foundation upon which it was built. Exactly 1 hour later, the conference room door opened. Mark came out first. His face was pale and drawn, his eyes avoiding mine. Brenda followed. Her composure was gone. Her face was streaked with tears, but her eyes were cold and hard with a fury that was directed entirely at me. She knew I was the one who had set this in motion. "We'll sign," Mark said, his voice barely a croak. Brenda said nothing. She just glared at me, her silence more venomous than any words she could have spoken. We all filed back into the conference room. Mr. Gable laid out the documents on the table. The first was a legally binding agreement, drafted by an attorney, that detailed the terms: full restitution via the transfer of their property, a relinquishment of any future claim to our father's estate, and the immediate and irrevocable surrender of her power of attorney. The second document was a new power of attorney, naming me as the sole agent for both financial and medical decisions. Brenda's hand shook as she picked up the pen. She signed her name with a vicious, angry slash of ink. Mark signed after her, his hand more steady but his expression defeated. When it was done, Mr. Gable notarized the signatures with a heavy, final stamp. He collected the documents and handed Brenda and Mark a single copy of the agreement. "My associate will be in touch with your lawyer to handle the details of the property transfer," he said, his tone dismissing them. "This meeting is over." They left without another word. As the door to the office suite closed behind them, I let out a breath I felt like I had been holding for 5 years. A profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over me, but for the first time, it wasn't tinged with despair. It was the exhaustion that comes at the end of a long, hard-fought battle. "You did it, Cheryl," Mr. Gable said, his voice soft. He placed a comforting hand on my shoulder. "You saved your father's legacy." I could only nod, tears welling in my eyes. They weren't tears of sadness or anger, but of overwhelming relief. The aftermath was quiet and swift. The property transfer went through within a month. The house Brenda had so proudly showcased on social media was now an asset in the Arthur Miller Care Trust, managed by a third-party trustee recommended by Mr. Gable. The trust would pay for all of Dad's expenses, including a salary for me, a real salary, one that recognized my labor and allowed me to rebuild my own savings. It would also fund professional in-home help, giving me the respite I had been denied for so long. The remaining funds from the sale of the house, after Dad's passing, would be split between his grandchildren, as was his original wish. Brenda, by signing the agreement, had effectively disinherited herself with her own greed. I never spoke to my sister again. I heard through our cousin Sarah that Brenda and Mark had downsized to a small rental apartment in a different town. Her social media went dark. The lifestyle influencer who had built a brand on a foundation of lies had vanished once the source of those lies was cut off. There was no public explosion, no dramatic family feud that spilled out into the open. Her empire simply and silently collapsed. My life, on the other hand, began to rebuild. With the financial pressure gone and with help from a wonderful part-time caregiver, I rediscovered parts of myself I thought were gone forever. I started taking on new graphic design clients. I had time to read books, to take walks, to meet a friend for coffee. I was no longer just a caregiver, I was Cheryl again. Dad lived for another 2 years. His mind continued to fade, and he never knew the details of the battle that had been waged on his behalf. In his clearer moments, he would sometimes ask about Brenda. "Brenda is busy," I would tell him gently, "but she sends her love." It was the last kindness I could offer, a small fiction to protect him from a painful truth. In the end, I was protecting his memory of his daughter, even if the reality was something else entirely. Balancing the books on my father's life had been a painful, ugly process. It had cost me a sister and 5 years of my life. But in that final accounting, I had restored his dignity and reclaimed my own future. As I sat in the quiet of my old home, a home that was now truly and securely ours, I knew we had finally found peace. The numbers were settled, the debts were paid, and the ledger was finally, thankfully, closed.